Welcome to Warnock Studios' presentation of finishes and selected major projects. Let's take a look at the types of finishes we offer, grouped by category. We begin with stone and marble. This stairwell with limestone walls was originally open to a second stairwell, but when portions of the building were recently remodeled, the two spaces had to be isolated by adding a cement firewall in order to meet changes in the fire code. We matched the existing limestone blocks on the firewall using glazes and hand-painted grout lines. Now we're looking at a photo of a pool house shower room that was taken while it was still under construction. Our client's architect originally specified flagstone on the walls and ceiling because it will tolerate the extremely moist air that a shower produces. But flagstone is very heavy, and our client was concerned that it might fall off the ceiling. So the architect asked us to create a photorealistic trompe-l'oeil mural that would convince guests that it was real flagstone, and then protect it from high humidity by adding a waterproof clear coat. Next, we have some examples of faux marble finishes. These panels were executed on drywall inside the rectangles of panel molding below the chair rail in this grand entrance. The marble fireplace is actually cast plaster, finished as polished white and black Italian Carrara marble embellished with polished antique bronze insets, which are also actually part of the cast plaster that we gilded with metal leaf. Here are three more examples of stone and marble finishes. The column on the left, finished as smooth Italian Rojo Alicante, is made of wood. The center column, finished as highly polished Italian Emperador marble, and the column on the right, finished as unpolished limestone, are both made of cast plaster. From stone and marble finishes, we move on to wood graining, or so-called faux bois finishes. Here we see paint-grade doors grained as mahogany with panel insets finished as book-ended crotch mahogany. The walls and stairway in this foyer are real hardwood. It's quarter-sawn oak, and the finish we applied to it is known as limed oak. If the house had been built several hundred years ago, chances are it would have had a limed oak finish. Not because of the look, but because infusing the wood with a mixture of slaked lime and beeswax helped prevent insect damage. And the old oak beams you see here, as well as the wrought iron straps used to attach them, are actually cast plaster. This is a close-up of a hardwood floor which has been painted to resemble inlaid marble octagons surrounded by inlaid wood. This is also an ordinary hardwood floor, painted to look as if it includes an intricate and elaborate marquetry pattern. And here is another inlay pattern, achieved with paint rather than wood. Now we are looking up rather than down. This is the ceiling of a space that serves as the entrance to a master bedroom suite. The photo shows the ceiling with paint-grade wood beams and cross beams as it looked before our work began. And this is how it looked when finished. We painted the beams to resemble driftwood. Then our client's interior designer had wallpaper installed between the ceiling beams. Here's another ceiling on which everything, even the beams, were constructed using drywall. Our finish gave them the look of stained oak beams, cross beams, and even corbels. We move next to examples of basic glazes. There are literally hundreds of possible finishes called wall glazes. So we'll pause for a moment to explain how a basic glaze finish is achieved. Glazing refers to the use of a translucent medium, mixed with a pigment or an opaque paint and thinned with solvent to a watery consistency. The glaze is applied to the substrate, which has been prepared with a solid coat of a different color in an eggshell sheen. While the glaze mixture is still wet, it's manipulated so that its thickness varies from one spot to the next, causing the precise hue and value to vary as well, because the thickness of the translucent glaze determines the extent to which the underlying base coat color shows through. And it's the combination of the base coat and one or more glazes that determines the pattern, hue, and value of the wall. By far, the most common of these is called a scumble, but a more descriptive term we like to use is broken color, which can be seen here on the corner wall and on the cast plaster which has been glazed to look like stone. The The finish on the right 2/3 of the wall in this second photo is a basic scumble or broken color finish. Broken color finishes have what we call depth and movement. The design on the left third of the wall was achieved using shading on top of the broken color finish after it's dried to create the illusion of depth. The finish in this third photo is a subtle example of a street A or a dragged finish. In addition to its linearity, it's been hand-rubbed to lighten the relief and allow the recesses to remain darker. Here are some extremely subtle hand-rubbed street A finishes with a gold pinstripe on the left, a blue one on the right. And this close-up shows a light red pinstripe and gilded gold highlights inside the carved shell. And here are photos of the doors and walls in the space that contains the carved shells. The doors were removed from a 14th century French chateau and installed in this new home outside Charlotte, North Carolina. This is an estate called Marywood. If you're a history buff or you're old enough to remember John Kennedy, you may also remember Marywood was where Jacqueline Bouvier lived when Kennedy asked her to marry him. And according to some accounts, this is where he proposed. It is also one of 3 homes we've been honored and privileged to do for someone else who's well known, who lived at Marywood with his family while his children were still living at home. In this first space, we applied a dragged finish to the carved wood paneling from the floor up to and including the chair rail. It's kind of a hybrid finish, not really a faux bois because it's not supposed to look like raw or stained wood, but rather a low-contrast dragged finish in colors selected by the designer to complement the colors in the Gracie wallpaper above the chair rail. And here's the living room, which we also glazed in a dragged finish using 2 shades of yellow and a bolder technique. Just beyond the living room is the music room, which we glazed in a broken color finish and then applied a custom stencil pattern on top of the basic wall glaze. Stencils tend to look better on glazed walls than they do on solid color backgrounds. The bas-relief panels are cast plaster, which we glazed to look like stone. From basic glazes, we move next to troweled finishes, which many people still call Venetian plaster, even though there are other troweled finishes available today. The reason the use of VP to describe the category persists is that Venetian plaster was the only troweled decorative finish in common use until very near the end of the 20th century, and it's still by far the most popular of the troweled finishes. Here's a living room with salmon pink Venetian plaster on the walls and the barrel ceiling. Universal tints were added to a mixture of plaster and fine marble dust to achieve the desired color, which was then troweled on the drywall in 4 thin layers and burnished to a high sheen. Here are 2 more examples in strong colors, and here's a more complex finish we created by troweling 3 different shades of gray on the surface at the same time, allowing them to mix randomly on the wall by skimming them while still wet, and then burnishing them after they dried. There's one other level of complexity we can add to a Venetian plaster finish by applying wax on top of the burnished plaster through a stencil and then polishing the wax as soon as it dries. The waxed areas are slightly more reflective than the unwaxed areas, but the difference is only noticeable when a light source is reflected on the surface at an angle that corresponds to your position in the room. When you move, the portion of the wall that reflects the waxed pattern appears to move with you. Next, we'll look at a gallery of selected major projects showing the variety of finishes, murals, and other forms of surface decoration we offer our clients. We begin with the largest single project we've completed so far, Norton Manor. We finished the walls and in some cases the ceiling of nearly every room in the 32,000 square foot main residence. We also did work in 2 lesser buildings, plus 3 outdoor murals, which were part of the 55 mural total included in the scope of our work. Let's begin by taking a closer look at the design inside the portico share, which we painted and gilded with 24-karat gold leaf. The design was inspired by a pattern we found on a 19th century ceramic tile. We simplified it and customized the shape to fit the space. First, we applied the blue and off-white background, using a type of paint that penetrates the surface of the substrate so it won't crack or peel as ordinary outdoor house paints do after 5 to 10 years. In addition, The pigments it contains will not fade even when subjected to direct sunlight. We use 24-karat gold leaf for the same reason. It can withstand extreme hot and cold temperatures, and it's not affected by direct sunlight. These materials are nearly 3 times more expensive than outdoor house paint and 14-karat gold leaf. But by using them, our artwork has a life expectancy of 90 to 120 years, compared to the typical lifespan of the less expensive alternative, which is 7 to 15 years. From the portico share, we enter the home through the west entry hall. This is one of only a handful of rooms where the designer chose to use wallpaper, but everything else except for the polished marble floor has been glazed in a subtle hand-rubbed off-white finish and embellished with 14-karat gold on the pilaster capitals, the relief of the cast plaster crown molding, and cast plaster ornamentation on the room's ceiling. In all, we finished over 35 rooms here, so we'll only look at a representative sample. First, we'll continue through the west entrance hall to the Grand Rotunda. It's Norton Manor's largest space. As you enter, it's almost impossible not to look up, especially on a sunny day when the sun shines through the windows of the third-floor clearstory and flood it with light. Just below the windows, we installed a 4.5-foot-high trompe-l'oeil frieze. We needed 8 repeats of the design to get all the way around the wall, so we hand-painted and photographed an original, and then printed 8 same-size high-resolution copies on canvas using the G-clay process, which can reproduce polychrome artwork so faithfully that it's difficult to distinguish a print from the original, even in a close-up side-by-side comparison. There's a second much larger and far more complex mural that covers the 12-foot 6-inch high walls on the main floor of the Grand Rotunda. The space is 40 feet in diameter at that level, which means the artwork required to cover it is 120 feet long. Inspired by a landscape mural on the walls of a 17th century French folly, the 360-degree circular landscape shows breathtaking imaginary views in all directions from the perspective of a balcony that overlooks them. Our clients chose a painterly style for the mural, which usually means a loose and expressive approach to the process of painting in which the brush strokes are visible. The painterly style works well when a painting is viewed from a distance, and since one's first glimpse of this mural is at a distance of nearly 40 feet as one enters the space, painterly should work. However, the work also had to stand up to close inspection, because the staircases leading to the second floor create narrow passageways where one can only view the walls at very close range, so we added a level of detail typical of a much smaller painting. In order to meet deadlines, we executed the mural on canvas ahead of time and off-site, then installed it like wallpaper as soon as construction of the walls was complete. Just to the right of the Grand Rotunda is the kitchen and morning room. The walls may look like they're covered with Delft tiles, but it's actually another complex finish we developed to imitate them. It was executed using a combination of stenciling, glazing, and hand painting, covered by a clear coat that adds sheen to the tiles, but leaves the grout lines with a matte finish. Next, we move to the lower level, which is designed to accommodate up to 500 guests. In addition to the French provincial style used on the first and second floors of Norton Manor, our clients love the Art Deco style, which is why the entire lower level features artwork inspired by iconic Art Deco designs. The walls, trim, and ceilings of the lower level have been glazed, hand-rubbed, and in some cases gilded, using colors that complement the artwork and furnishings in each space. In addition, we produced 22 murals for the lower level. This lower-level entry hall features 2 identical copies of a mural inspired by a photo of an Art Deco screen. All of the murals on the lower level were produced digitally and printed on canvas as ultra-high-resolution G-clays. From the entry hall, we move next to the lower-level lounge. The lounge includes murals inspired by the Art Deco elevator doors in the Chrysler Building in New York City. Digitally created images are reproduced from ultra-high-resolution digital files, and 6 of the 9 use the design as a border, surrounding a hand-painted landscape of a well-known federal building or national monument. Just to the right of the lounge is the bar room, where we created 7 variations of a mural inspired by this photo of an Art Deco screen. We hand-painted the initial design and photographed it, then used the shapes to create a 3-dimensional image, which we then printed on canvas and installed. Beyond the bar room is the wine room, where all the walls are covered with digitally created images inspired by this photo of an Art Deco butterfly. Like all the murals on the lower level, the image was created using image editing software to create a textured background, then adding shapes, then texture and depth to the shapes, and finally adding highlights simulating reflected light and shadows to create the illusion of depth. The digital images were divided into 42-inch wide vertical strips, and each strip was printed on canvas and installed on the walls like wallpaper. From the lower level, we head up and outside, where in addition to the ceiling of the portico share, we painted 3 other murals. Our clients were going to build lattice and plant ivy on this long cement wall, but ultimately realized the wall doesn't get enough sunlight to support live plants. So they asked us to paint the lattice and the ivy surrounding a trompe-l'oeil fountain. We used stencils to paint the lattice and the background color of the ivy leaves, using the same substrate penetrating paints we used on the portico share. Then we hand-painted the veins and added shadows to the ivy. The finished wall has a fountain surrounded by lattice supporting healthy ivy that never needs sun or water and looks green and healthy all year round. There's a terrace behind the lower level lounge, and beyond it is a fountain backed by a colonnade that blocks the view of the neighboring property. The colonnade was designed for a mural, so we suggested several options, and our clients chose this one. Like all of our outdoor artwork, we used paint that will still look new well into the 23rd century. Our 4th artwork outside the main residence technically isn't outdoors. It's the ceiling of this glass-enclosed pavilion, and unlike the first 3, we played no part in the design process. The exact image was specified by our client's designer. Like the Delft tile we painted on the walls of the morning room, we used a combination of stenciling, glazing, and hand painting to produce it. But this time, the stenciling proved a bit more difficult because the concaved surface prevents a stencil the size we'd normally use from lying flat. So we broke the design into dozens of small pieces, which we aligned to create the larger element. That's it for Norton Manor, and almost it for our presentation. It's not the 4th of July, but we thought it would be fun to go out with a bang, the kind of grand finale that ends a fireworks display. A rapid-fire presentation of our work set to music and without commentary. This will last a minute, and our hope is it will leave you with a sense of the range and quantity of projects we've completed since 1986. Hope you enjoy it.